Hello and welcome to another episode of Charles Weekly Party. I'm Charles, your host, and before we get started with what I think is going to be a pretty cool episode today, let's roll the intro. Alright, so last week I had mentioned that Apple would be holding an event on my release day. And because of everything that was going on, it was not anywhere near feasible for me to watch the event and then record an episode and then release the episode. There are just too many issues with doing it in that way. So because of that, this week is going to be another tech episode. And anyone who tuned in or who's tuning in because they really like architecture stuff, I'd ask you to stay and continue listening because, realize it or not, the architecture world is heavily reliant on technology. And what I'm going to be talking about today is some impressive new technology that will hopefully make severe contributions towards the future of architecture. Because in today's world, buildings are designed with building information modeling software. And obviously computers need to be able to run that, and with the increasing demands of the software, we need more capable computers. And Apple has just released some of those. But that isn't the only thing that they released, and before I get started on talking about that, I'm going to finish up my opening thoughts. So, looking at the future, I know this is the 32nd episode of the season, which means after this there will be 8 more episodes to go. And of those 8 episodes, there will be 5 sort of regular episodes, although I do have something special planned for next week's episode, so make sure you tune in for that. But also, I'm planning out another arc-isode and some regular episodes before doing a couple of look-backs on the year. And the last episode for the season finale will be a sort of special feature that you'll see when we get to that point. But let's not rush along the end of the season quite yet, because I'm looking forward to talking about architecture and technology still. And that's why I record this podcast, that's why you listen, and that's what I'm going to do. So, Apple started off the event. Well, they actually started off the event with a beautiful sort of musical number created with sounds of Apple products, both software sounds like the Mac boot up, as well as physical sounds like the opening and closing of AirPods cases. So that was an interesting little opening thing, and I could listen to that for quite a while. I'd really like to see where that goes. So if I can find that on Apple Music, I'm going to be listening to it. And speaking of Apple Music, that was the first thing they talked about. So for Apple Music, because of how nice Siri is to be able to work with for getting your music playing, Apple's announced a new voice plan in addition to the other 2 plans. And when I heard this, at first, my first thought was, wait, so I'm going to have to start paying extra to use Siri for it? But no, that's not the case. Apple has discounted the plans, or discounted the voice plan, so there are now 3 available. And what the voice plan is basically you're able to use Siri to play music, and that's it. So you can't just go in and look up the things in the Apple Music library. You have access to songs, playlists, and stations, and on all of your Apple devices. And If you want to search for a song without using Siri, though, well, you won't be able to do that. So the other two plans, the individual plan and the family plan, stay the same, which is, and the benefits of the individual plan, which is $10 a month as opposed to the $5 a month for the voice plan. You get everything with the voice plan, plus you get lyrics and music videos, as well as support for spatial and lossless audio. And it works on all of your Apple devices, but it also works on supported devices. So, for example, iTunes on Windows, or they actually do have a web application that you can use without downloading iTunes to play music from your Apple Music subscription. And the family plan, which costs $15 a month, is basically the individual plan, except up to 6 people can listen at any point in time. My thoughts on it are quite simple and quite straightforward. Right now, I do actually have I use Apple Music. I have an individual plan. And would I downgrade to the voice plan? I would not. The reason for that is simple. Oftentimes, when I ask Siri to play a song, maybe I've heard one that's interesting, especially if it's not in. I do listen to some songs that are in other languages being languages that are not English. And if I ask Siri to play that, usually I'll get some random song that I could see where it pulled the title from, but isn't what I was looking for. And at that point in time, the easiest solution is just to search for it. So for me, that if I want to listen to a song, if Siri's not quite comprehending what I'm saying, I'll occasionally run into that issue. And when I do, it's easiest to just search for the song, because that I know I'll be able to find the right one and play the right one. With Apple's addition to the lineup of Apple Music plans, Apple has also gone and increased the number of devices that you can listen to Apple Music on, starting with a new set of AirPods. So basically, it looks like they took the sort of design schematic from the AirPods Pro and just took away the, what's the name for it? The interchangeable ear cup to create a new set of AirPods. And basically, the new design does feature spatial audio, so if you do have the Apple Music individual plan or higher, you'll be good to use that feature. They have a new custom driver in there with longer battery life, as well as adaptive EQ. And the AirPods case now has support for MagSafe charging. There are force sensor controls on the AirPods themselves. So, if you are an AirPods fan, these are the new latest and greatest AirPods, and they they go for $179, and the previous generation is now only $129. So personally, am I a big fan of AirPods? In my particular case, I haven't gone down the AirPods route, and that is quite simply because I like my thing is enjoying battery life. I like to be able to turn my headphones on and be able to use them for a reasonable amount of time without having to think about charging them. And sometimes I'll be listening for hours straight. My only other real beef with AirPods is that I can only use them on Apple devices. Don't get me wrong, I do enjoy my Apple devices, but occasionally I do like using, if I find a good set of headphones, I like using them with other devices as well. So sometimes, and I don't purely use Apple devices. Matter of fact, the notes that I have for these for the episode today are on a Windows laptop, and the podcast itself gets edited on a Windows desktop. And obviously, I like having wireless headphones to use with those, and the AirPods wouldn't be able to do that. And that reminds me of the third reason I'm not a huge fan of AirPods, and it has to do with the cost. I get that there are a lot of things that Apple does on their headphones and that they work great with Apple devices, but for $179, I can get quite a number of things. The last time I had to get a replacement set of earbuds, the Apple ones would have set me back $19, but I found a set of Bluetooth headphones that actually cost $1 less, had 24 hours of battery life, or actually I think it's 23, but close enough. And for lack of better words, I could go and use them with whichever device I preferred. So I actually picked up two sets, one to use with my tablet, the other to use with my desktop computer. And I'll just say this, long battery life and whatnot, and decent sound quality for the price point. I managed to get them about 50% off. So between those two things, that's what I consider a really good set of headphones. I know they don't have spatial audio or some of the other pieces and whatnot, but for me, they do the job. Another device you can listen to Apple Music on is HomePod Mini, and that will work no matter what plan that you decide to get. So HomePod Mini wasn't upgraded, but it was made available in more colors. So previously you had the white and the space gray HomePods, but now you have a blue HomePod, HomePod Minis, I should be saying. You have a blue HomePod Mini, a yellow HomePod Mini, and an orange HomePod Mini. So those are looking pretty nice. So if you happen to be a fan of the HomePod, but they just didn't have the right color for you, well, look no further. Now they do. So nothing too special about the HomePod Mini. Whether or not you should have an always listening microphone in your house is a whole different debate to be had, but if you're fine with that, then HomePod Mini is available in more colors for you. Now, for the news that actually really got my energy up, the addition of the M1 Pro and the M1 Max to the M1 lineup. Rumors have been circulating for months about what was dubbed an M1X chip, a more powerful chip by Apple designed for more of the pro use. And what none of us saw coming was that Apple was going to use a different naming convention, and B, Apple was going to release two chips. That was a surprise. But for starters, the M1 Pro has 33.7 billion transistors, and it's built on the same 5 nanometer process as the M1, except with more capability and supports up to a 32 gigabyte memory configuration. The M1 Pro has support for 2 external displays and Thunderbolt 4, with up to a 10-core CPU and a 16-core GPU. And for the CPU, they have 8 high-performance cores and 2 high-efficiency cores. So for the more mundane tasks, you can throw those at the high-efficiency cores, And for the more intensive tasks, you can toss those at the high performance. The M1 Max blew it out of the water. So it has the same sort of 10-core CPU as the M1 Pro does. Same 5 nanometer process, except it's a lot bigger with 57 billion transistors on it. It can support up to 64 gigabytes of memory, and it has 400 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth, which, if you know computers, is an incredible amount of storage, or of bandwidth, excuse me. But the other piece on the M1 Max is that it has up to a 32-core GPU, and that will crunch. That will crunch a lot. So both of them support ProRes. I also forgot to mention encoding and decoding. And last but not least, on the M1 Max, it supports up to 4 external displays. So that's a lot of stuff. So once again, with the M1, Apple made a really, really good chip. And with the Pro and the Max, I think Apple has actually sort of won the chip processor competition. And I say sort of because, well, Apple has, what's the best way to put it? Apple has a really powerful chip that'll move really quickly. But at present, the limitation is the fact that it's only available for Mac and it's not upgradable. So one of the biggest arguments between PCs and Macs are that you have, or actually I should say Windows computers, because technically PC is a personal computer. A personal computer is a personal computer. So technically speaking, because both the Mac and Windows are computers, the term PC could technically be used on either, although it's more commonly used to refer to Windows computers, which is often why I hear Windows PC. The problem is that if you want to run Windows applications, I believe there's a way of running Windows as a virtual desktop within the Mac OS, but with Mac OS Big Sur, they changed a couple of things and whatnot or actually, with the M1, they changed a few things so that you can't do a separate boot up of a Windows operating system like you could in older Macs. And I think that limitation is one of the key pieces that's keeping Apple from truly winning the competition. Because if you could boot if you could get an M1 Max computer and boot Windows off of it, then you have the most capable computer. Then you've won the processor piece to some degree. Because I don't consider just making the fastest chip truly winning it. Because for AMD and for Intel, they create the chips. You have a choice, but you have a lot of choices in what you get on a computer. And if you're getting a desktop, you have a lot of flexibility. Laptop, not as much, but usually you have some. And as nice as it is for Mac to have very fast memory bandwidth because the memory is on the same chip as the processor, hence the system on a chip scheme. It's, for lack of better words, the limiting factor is how much you can afford to pay when you're buying the computer. Whereas if you're getting a Windows computer, oftentimes you can get a configuration that fits into your budget that you can upgrade later on, and you can buy something with that intent. So for my desktop computer, which I custom built, I picked out the specs very carefully. So at any point in time, if my budget permits for it, I can upgrade that computer. So that one, if I had the money and intention to double the memory tomorrow, I could do it. Whereas Mac, on this, if you get the 32 gigabyte memory configuration, you cannot upgrade that later on to a 64 gigabyte unified memory version, because it's the unified memory that's on that chip. You can't upgrade it. So that's my only real problem with Apple on that, which is that it's nice. It's really powerful computing that they have available. But you need to be within the ecosystem, and right now, I can't justify the price tag on it to be able to do that stuff. I get that it's powerful, but if you can't afford it, well, you have to pick alternative ways of getting what you need. Also, it should be noted for some of the specs that I have basically same sort of processing power at about half the price, or similar, I should say. But the M1 Pro and the M1 Max are great chips, but you can't use them if you just have a CPU or if you have a system chip. You can carry it around. Look, I have Apple's most powerful processor. It doesn't do you any good without hardware to use it on. So, Apple announced a new set of MacBook Pros that really and truly brought in the latest and greatest in their operating system. Or did you say that? Truly brings together the latest and greatest of their processor technology, and combining it with Mac OS brings a pretty nice bundle together. So the two display sizes available are a 16-inch and a 14-inch MacBook Pro. The screen size is actually, for once, larger, or slightly larger than that measurement, so it's actually 16.2 and 14.2 inches. Apple also put in a Liquid Retina XDR display, so really, really good image quality on those, as well as the ProMotion display that was announced on the iPhone 13 Pro. So basically allowing the display to run at 120 hertz when you're doing something with a lot of motion, but if you're just staring at an article for a moment, then it'll minimize the refresh rate of the screen. And of course, if you're doing something with cinematography and you need a standard refresh rate, there's an option in the operating system to do that. Apple also finally upgraded the FaceTime camera to a 1080 pixel one, with a slight catch that some people are going, to be fine with, other people are going to hate. And that thing is called a notch. Yes, Apple put a notch into the MacBook Pro. My thinking on it is, well, first and foremost, it should be noted that the notch coincides with the top bar. So if you're not familiar with Mac OS, at the top of the screen is a bar with your options menu as well as the main system options thing. So basically similar to the operating system control functions in the start menu on Windows, except on Apple it's located at the top. With the notch coinciding with the top bar, most people shouldn't find any issue with the screen real estate, and in fact it should give a little bit more. Personally, I'm a dark mode person, so having, in my particular case, I think I could actually live with it. But if you're using, let's say you're watching a movie or something, in the widescreen format, it should make the top bar black completely, so that so that the notch is not something you notice. But the biggest things about the new MacBook Pro that people are shouting and cheering about is the reintroduction of standardized ports. MagSafe is back. And last but not least, the touch bar has died and been replaced with a full height row of function keys, which some people, of course, as was in the first case, some people are cheering about, and some people are sad to see the touch bar go. But I get the problems with the touch bar, because my thing is, there are keys that were at the top of the Mac that are useful, and they didn't make it so you could customize what the touch bar was doing. So it had its pros, it had its cons. So be it what it will. That's the situation that we're in. What do I think about this? For starters, the new MacBook Pro lineup starts at $2,000, and I have not configured anything to see how expensive it is when maxed out, but I believe you can double the cost if I remember what I heard correctly. But when they announced that MagSafe was back, my first thought of concern was, for the people who like the USB-C charging, and for the benefit it provided of you could charge the Mac from either side, did that go away with the reintroduction of MagSafe? And the answer is no, which I was actually quite thrilled about. So if you're using MagSafe, you have to use the charger on the left side of the computer, but if you're using USB-C, you can still use that to charge and dock and whatnot, which means if you are a power user, you can simply have a USB-C Apple charger, you can have a hub ready to go so that so when you sit down at home, you can plug in, or sit down at home or work, plug in one cable and you're charging, you have display capabilities, all that fun stuff with one port. So realistically, it's the best of both worlds without needing that same adapter just to hook up to a display, which is actually a problem I had recently with someone who had one of the new MacBook Pros, and with all USB-C ports, I had no way of accessing I had no way of directly connecting that computer to a display. So luckily I was able to resolve that problem, but it would have been a lot easier if there had been an HDMI port, which did get reintroduced. Another thing that a lot of pros were calling for and got reintroduced was a SD card slot, which for photographers is incredibly useful because having to carry around a dongle just to plug in a memory card is painful, especially when the computer has the space for it. Then you could actually fit a port on the side of the computer. When I'm using a SD card, I strongly prefer to just put the thing into the computer and not have to worry about getting a whole clunky external adapter to use that with. Personally, I just find that 12 times more painful. But here we are. Do I like the new MacBook Pros? If it weren't for the price tag, I'd love them. I get why the price tag is so high, because there's a chip shortage going on. And when you have a bigger CPU, that actually does have its own set of problems. Because if you aren't familiar with the CPU manufacturing process, basically what ends up happening is you have a circular wafers which chips are produced on and sort of cut out. And often enough there will be some defect in some of the way the wafers come out. So some things will work out better and some things won't work out as well. With I guess, I don't want to say normal, with AMD and Intel's chips, what ends up happening with the with the parts of the wafer that are really, really good and are faster, those are the higher end chips. Whereas the ones that have some slowness or whatnot to them are the lower capability chips. So with what I saw from their presentation, my curiosity has to do with how much of the wafer they're actually able to use. Because if you get a strong enough or significant enough defect, you can't use that chip. And if you're thinking about the circular wafer, you only have so many chips. The bigger you make the chip, the higher the chances of finding a defect. And if you find a defect, that entire part of that wafer, or the part of that wafer that would be for that chip, is rendered useless. So I think that's part of the reason why the starting price is where it is. And for once, I think that means the MacBook Pro will be for pros. So these two are not going to be something that you pick up just to browse the internet at a coffee shop. Although, if you have the funds to do it, not necessarily the worst idea, but, I mean, if you're just going to be browsing the internet, get a Mac, and you want a Mac, get a MacBook Air. Half the cost. Does it be able to do that just smoothly? No problem. I guess, at the end of the day, Apple's released a beautiful new set of chips. I can't complain about them too much, and for obvious budgetary reasons, I will not be able to afford getting one to test it out, so I do invite you to look around on the internet or look around on YouTube for different reviews and whatnot. But I think it's something to look forward to. And my only question is, what is Apple going to do to up the game in the future? Because we thought they pulled out all their stops with M1. And now we have the M1 Pro and the M1 Pro, Max. Two really powerful chips, which brings up the question of how are they going to make this better in the future? Or will Apple just not be releasing a M2 chip right away. The whole job of the M1 chip and the M1 Pro and M1 Pro and the M1 Max chips was to transition from using Intel chips to their own silicon. And Apple really did a good job on that piece of making their chips really good. So, and part of that had to do with the fact that Intel was having some issues with their chips, and when the M1 chips came out, there were a couple of people who were thrilled, or who were stuck in a situation because they're thrilled with the M1 chip's performance, but they liked the 16-inch screen size. So the new MacBook Pros sort of remedy that with you can get a high-powered chip without having to worry about losing the screen real estate. But now that I've gone through that, I think that's where I stand. That's where all the entertainment is today. And I do hope that you've enjoyed this episode. I'm going to close off by saying this is a pretty incredible transition that we've been watching. It's not completely over, and when I say not completely over, I mean there's still one big hurdle to jump, which is the Mac Pro. For all we know, we might see a resurgence of the trash can because they have chips that are actually able to handle that sort of thing now. But the one thing that could be an issue in the Mac Pro is people who get the Mac Pro, the Mac Pro is able to be expanded to 1.5 terabytes of memory. Not a cheap task, but it's right now the M1 Max is capped at 64 gigabytes of memory. So how is Apple going to do that in the future? And are they going to come up with a way of increasing increasing the capabilities of the Mac Pro while also having adaptability? So maybe they come up with a design where it has the unified memory that it uses first, or for whatever is most important to be worked on, and then has additional memory to use once the 64 gigabytes of memory have been maxed out. And yes, it is possible to max out 64 gigabytes of memory. So over the course of the transition process, it started off with the Mac Mini, MacBook Air, and the 13-inch MacBook Pro. And this year we got the new colorful iMacs, which are thinner than the original iPhone, which is beyond impressive. And now we have the remainder of the MacBook Pros. So the transition, aside from the Mac Pro, is just about complete. So overall, I just don't have words to describe how excited I am for the potential of these new chips. I'm also excited about the future episodes of Charles Weekly Part 2, and you should be too. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss those future episodes. And I do have something special planned next week, so definitely tune in. You can go to anchor.fm/Charles Weekly Part T if you want to listen to any future episode, as well as interacting with voice messages or supporting the podcast. Plus, you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts if you're listening there, and if you want, you can see the action on YouTube. So that's going to do it for today. My part two for the week is just if you think um, if you think you've done your best and you can't do anything better, you're wrong. Because that was the big thing circulating with or when the M1 was released. How is Apple going to outdo this? And they just outdid it in spades. So don't limit yourself because you think you've reached the top. You can always go higher. Take care and roll the outro.